Okay, so we're looking at navigating the in-between. The in-between, of course, is, it first came up for me when I was thinking about doing spiritual mind treatment. So you do the treatment, and then you're waiting for the demonstration, right? So what do you do in the in-between? And then I thought, well, that really applies to any situation where something has happened and you're trying to navigate the end result. So for the purpose of this workshop, I'd like you to think about the center, right? We had a minister, and now we're in the in-between and waiting for being at a place where we're prepared for a new minister. So there's work to be done. And part of it is something that may occur to you as we go through this. You can also apply it to any situation that's going on in your life right now. So think about it however way is meaningful to you. So what is the in-between? For an interim minister, it's to support communities in consciously moving through periods of transition, knowing that a healthy transition creates the foundation for long-term viability and the vitality of the community. For you personally, it's the same thing. You've got to be your own coach, your own guide, in terms of finding support and consciously moving through periods of transition, knowing that a healthy transition creates the foundation for long-term vitality and viability of your life. Is that making sense? You've got to do this work. Nobody can do it for you. So that's the point of that. That's what the interim does. Does anyone know what a trim tab is? If any of you have boats? So a trim tab, we have these container ships out here. And if they're fully loaded, and let's say they're at sea and they want to make a 45-degree angle, they've got all this momentum and speed going in one direction. And if they turn the rudder, it's very difficult to change that momentum. So on the rudder, there are these small rudders that are called trim tabs. And the trim tabs operate in such a way that they get the rudder to start to turn. And I like to think that's what an interim minister does. I'm just a trim tab, getting the rudder to turn in the direction that you guys want to go in. So that's our job today. This model was created by William Bridges and published in his book, Managing Transitions. The main strength of the model is that it focuses on transition, not change. Okay? We all pretty much can manage our own change. You know, you've managed how to operate during COVID. You've managed how to see what's happening here at the center, but we're not talking about managing change. We're talking about, this is how he describes it, transition is internal. It's what happens in people's minds as they go through change. Change can happen very quickly, while transition usually occurs more slowly. And although we're going to talk about stages of this transition, I really, when it comes to hierarchies and stages that are listed 1, 2, 3, it's important to remember that you can bounce back and forth between anywhere, depending on what change is happening and where you feel, because you may make a change and that can trigger another change. It can trigger something else spiritually or emotionally that you need to deal with. So again, it's staying in that place of being open rather than judgment, that, oh, I'm not up to speed yet, or I don't know this well enough, or whatever it is. We want to focus on really being gentle with ourselves and understanding that it takes time. He says that people go through each stage at their own pace. Those who are comfortable with change will likely move ahead to stage 3 quickly, while others will linger at stage 1 or 2. And again, that depends on what we're talking about. So John, if we could see the next slide. Change is something that happens to people even if they don't agree with it. You think? How often does that happen? Transition is internal. It's what happens in people's minds as they go through change. And change can happen quickly while transition usually occurs more slowly. And so it's like the story that I told this morning of the woman that was, dotting the I's and crossing the T's and toughing her way through it until she finally had the meltdown with everything falling out of the freezer. Next slide, John. People will go through each stage at their own pace. Those who are comfortable with change will likely move ahead to stage 3 more quickly. Others will linger at stages 1 or 2. So can anyone relate to this? Is there something in your experience that you'd like to share about being stuck?
Same thing happened with me. The freezer thing happened to me too, because I was helping a man that has has 2 freezers and a refrigerator and a freezer on bottom. And what happens is I was just trying to stuff all the things in his freezer, and he couldn't see. And then all of a sudden, everything just started falling out. And I go, oh, geez. He goes, what's the matter? What's the matter? I go, nothing. Nothing is happening. Everything's fine. And I just need a little time. Then I took all the things that were out and just slowly put them all back. And they were okay. But it took a while.
And it can take a while to process that. As I was saying, we can say, well, what were you thinking that caused that? But you can also think about, okay, what has been going on in my life right now? And more importantly is, how did I feel about all that stuff falling out? That's where the key piece is. You're going to go skiing. You're going to, do whatever you're going to do. It isn't so much what happens to you, it's how you think about what's happening. Wenda.
I actually found myself beating myself up for getting COVID. I mean, I didn't beat anybody else up for getting COVID, but I beat myself up for getting COVID. I mean, and I realized that's absolutely ridiculous, but that's exactly what I was doing. I was shaming myself for, what was going on in my consciousness. What was I thinking that I allowed myself and my body to succumb to this virus? And I have these different ridiculous standards for myself than I do for the rest of the entire world.
Isn't that interesting? Anyone relate to that? We beat ourselves up for something that has gone wrong, something that we did.
I just wanted to say, besides the joke that I just said about beating yourself up, we really don't have any more choice than a breathing pollution. We have to breathe, and it's there, and it's just part of the experience now. It's just wanted to support you in that.
Thank you. And as we go through this, you may recognize where you are still in any of these stages in terms of, are we still stuck on shame? Are we still, and maybe it's an issue with COVID, but not with something else. So that's what I mean is we've really got to be gentle with ourselves in approximating where we are on anything. So as we're thinking about what's happening in the center, it's important, even though you may think that we're moving through this and we're at a stage where all the past is behind us, if you're still holding on to something from the past, it's going to impact what happens in the future. And so any feelings there that are unexpressed, you can express them here or find somebody that would support you in just listening. Okay? Yes, Marjorie.
I will just share that a couple of years ago I had a droopy eyelid, which turned out to be a pituitary tumor in my brain pushing on my optic nerve. And thank goodness I called a practitioner and she allowed me to just cry because I was scared. there was no way I was thinking about God. I wasn't blaming myself. At that point, I was just scared. And it took a while, but eventually I was able to let go and know that that the hospital had recruited a doctor that could do the surgery through my nose 5 years prior. So I had the perfect doctor here, and it all went beautifully. But I recognize that going through whatever I'm feeling is so important. Otherwise, you're right, it'll come and kick you behind.
Yes, thank you. The universe will have its way with us, you know. Is anyone familiar with Emerson's circles, the essay on circles? Well, he says that we come back around to the same point in our life very, very frequently, but we're usually at an elevated place so that it's really not a circle, it's a spiral, evolutionary spiral, that we keep coming back to the same place, but we remember what we did before and hopefully change the behavior so that we can evolve and change. But I think it's interesting that we keep coming back to some of the same issues. And maybe that's part of reincarnation, karma, I don't know. To me, it doesn't really matter. Next slide, please. Stage 1, ending, losing, and letting go. This is the initial stage of transition when first presented with change. It's marked with resistance and emotional upheaval because people are having to let go of something that they are comfortable with. Did anyone experience that when Nicole and Michael left? Or when Josh left? When Josh left, okay. So here's an example. Maybe there were unresolved issues when Josh left in terms of emotional upheaval, resistance and emotional upheaval that were never allowed, for whatever reason, to be expressed. So imagine energetically, that's what Nicole and Michael stepped into. You see, this is why an interim is important, is to allow any unfinished business to come up. And it's a challenge to try and root that stuff out and find it, you know, because then it's easy to target the people that stepped in and said, well, it's their fault, or they're not good enough, smart enough, or whatever. You know, we all bring our level of competence to a situation, but if energetically things aren't cleared up, you're starting below ground, you know, and it can be a real challenge. So are there any, as we look at this, at that stage, people may experience fear, denial, anger, sadness, disorientation, frustration, uncertainty, sense of loss. Any of those feelings resonate with you now? Is there anything still there that you'd like to express regarding this center? Yes?
I was surprised because
You were just
I wasn't here when they left. And I just go, what? They're gone. What happened? And I just was like, I didn't know anything had happened until Lowell told me. And then I go, oh, they're gone? Oh, well.
So, surprise. Yes.
I've taken a bunch of classes from the Science of Mind people for the 33 years I've been hanging around. And one class was an 8-week class called Self-Mastery. But it doesn't go anywhere near helping you to master yourself, because mastering yourself requires going down through those stages into the deepest emotional pain, from societal abuse, family, child abuse, neglect, abandonment, enmeshment, all the different kinds of ways that the parents didn't bond properly with children because they're, were not educated to do so, and were not bonded with themselves, et cetera, evolutionarily. And there's just so much more work that needs to be done before somebody is really qualified to be a minister. And so many of the people have to come and go because they are not in self-mastery. Even though they've got a credential as a minister, they really haven't done the deepest work that's necessary to give them solid footing, the buoyancy to sustain conditions all around them.
And that's a great point. If we waited for someone to be able to teach self-mastery, we'd be waiting forever. As a minister, I know that I teach what I need to learn. But to be fair, I need to position that class just that way, to say 8 weeks ain't long enough to master anything. You know, so part of it is the whole setup of the class to understand that my expectation of being able to master all those things and be aware of all the trauma, whether it was imagined or real, of my life, you know, I can't be processing that while I'm teaching it. But I have to be open to experiencing it as I'm teaching. Pardon me?
What about teaching by example, especially teaching by flawed example?
Well, and that's exactly what I'm saying, is that if I'm teaching and it triggers something in me, I just simply have to mention it and say, you know, I'm getting really emotional here because this is hitting too close to home. But this is, you know, again, a transition of understanding that this is a normal thing, and to expect that, you know, where are our expectations when we go into anything? Yes.
I think I have to get really honest because I came here in, I think, 2015. I'd been at Huntington Beach for over 30 years, and they had just, they never, in my opinion, went through the loss of Peggy Bassett, those of you that know her. And so everybody who came on was just not good enough and eventually left. And so I went to 3 or 4 different centers. I came here and I said, oh, you've got Josh, you have April, and at that time, Nicole was teaching a class and she was so vibrant and alive. I said, oh my, I found my center. And then 2 or 3 years later, he left, and I have to admit that there was anger. I had this dream. I found this perfect center, and now one of the cornerstones. The church didn't change, and I'm so glad I stayed because this center has a core of love that is palpable and it's beyond the value of money. And so I recognize that it was the loss of the dream, what I thought was going to be my path, and anger that Josh left right after I got here.
Thank you, Marjorie.
And let me just say, I am so glad that we have an interim minister, that we're going through the process, so whoever we get has an open chance of moving forward because we've done our work, and I just cannot applaud you enough.
Thank you. People have to accept that something is ending before they can begin to accept a new idea. If emotions aren't acknowledged, resistance will likely occur through the entire change process.
Yeah, I was very angry, and I wrote Reverend Josh an angry email. Because we weren't allowed, or I was not allowed to go, as we're doing now, to go through the interim. All of a sudden we had new ministers, but we did not have the process in place to accept the new ministers because we weren't given the choice. That's my opinion.
And your opinion is pretty widespread throughout Centers for Spiritual Living because it's a widespread issue of many ministers are my age or older, and we have an interim group that we meet once a month to talk about this, and the turnover now is just tremendous of ministers. So the need for interim is really widespread right now. just to do this kind of work, to address these issues. You had a question here?
I just wanted to follow up on this because I think this is really hitting home for our center, and piggybacking on Marjorie and Sylvia is I think that we absolutely need to have possibly some sort of a session with the congregants where people can express their frustration, their anger, their fear from back to losing Josh, and then some for Michael and Nicole. But I do think there is still a lot of loss and things that have not been expressed. I think that's critical going forward, and so that's something that maybe we can do.
And I appreciate that. And this is one of those opportunities that people can take advantage of. So I don't know what that would look like, whether it's a town hall. Essentially, we would go back through this sheet so that people would have an opportunity to do this.
Just having the whole thing focus on specifically releasing the loss of the minister. Yeah, but we can talk more tomorrow.
Thank you. Did you have a question?
Everybody talks about Josh, and I'll just say one thing. The thing about it is I hated to see him go as well, very close to him and so forth. But what we all need to always understand is that the other person is making a choice for them. We haven't been thinking about them. It's only us. So we need to realize that he was progressing to a part in his life where he had to move forward. So, we need to look at that with not just ourselves, what we're upset about. It's to be happy for him or whatever moves.
And thank you. That's a great point. And a lot of people can't get there till they've released the emotions of anger and disappointment or surprise or whatever it is. So you see that these things have a natural progression if we have a safe space to do it in. Otherwise, it's hard to get to that place of being happy for Josh, good for him, but I'm still upset, But that's where we want to get to, is being happy for him. Yes?
No, I just think that right now, we can't exclude COVID from any of this. The COVID situation from any of this. We can't exclude COVID from any of this. It's interesting that it's all happening at the same time, and I think if you look at your own lives, you have stuff happening at the same time. And you can't possibly expect everything to not be involved with COVID at this point.
Well, it's in our face every day, right? Yeah. That's why we're wearing masks. Yeah, and it points to the evolution of centers. What is happening with our centers in terms of COVID and change and what do they call it, the Great Resignation? It's impacting in our centers as well. A tremendous turnover with people in my age that either they are not willing to make change. The whole technology thing has pushed a lot of ministers right over the edge and out of their communities because it is a tremendous challenge. The energy of a minister it's really hard to describe how to live up to the expectations, not only of the community, but themselves. And then to throw the technology change in there is just push a lot of people over the edge. And they haven't done this kind of work to really think about, well, not only do I have to change, but what's going on emotionally, spiritually, mentally, and am I willing to do the work? And it's virtually impossible to do that in front of your community. So that's another aspect that makes it really hard for a minister to process in front of people, because that's not a healthy thing. So going through this, losing and letting go and ending is a piece that everyone can benefit from doing. Okay, Sylvia.
One of the advantages of COVID is that we've had to slow down. So in the process of slowing down, we get this opportunity to move through the transition.
Absolutely. And so that's an important part, is not only identifying all these things, these feelings, but because I have these feelings, what opportunities are arising? That was the first slide. What is the opportunity in the in-between that I'm looking at here? So the next slide, John. Stage 2, the neutral zone. People often are confused, uncertain, and impatient. They may experience a higher workload. Has anyone here had a higher workload? Marjorie, you're laughing a little too loud. Yeah, there are expectations that, and much of the community has no idea of that shift. Who's doing all the work that the minister was doing? Marjorie, Janice, Pam, Carol, you know, yeah.
It's more than just me, gang.
Yeah. So may experience a higher workload. In the neutral zone, you have a bridge between the old and the new. At this stage, people may experience resentment toward the change, low morale and low productivity, anxiety about their role, status, or identity, and skepticism about the change. And I shared a little of this when my son was born, that, you know, I was determined to be a good father, and looking back, I know I was, but I still had some resentment toward the change. I had a thriving consulting business, and all of a sudden, you know, that's scattered in pieces. The low morale and low productivity, I couldn't get done what I knew needed to get done. You know, the morale of changing diapers. You know, never mind trying to support my wife, and, you know, she'd carried the load for 9 months and was still a minister and still trying to do everything she was doing. And so, you know, who was going to pick up the slack and support her there? You know, so it's understandable, but we can't deny these feelings and saying, you know, I can't say I wasn't resentful. I did have low morale and low productivity. I was worried about, could I live up to being a father? And, you know, how would this impact my identity with the community? I'll tell you one thing I did. I carried that baby around and I would not let anyone touch it. My left bicep got really strong. It was like holding a bowling ball, you know, for hours. We go to a restaurant and, you know, I'd pick the baby up and carry him around so that my wife could eat, you know. But all those things were present too. So again, being mindful of what we're going through, what is happening here in the neutral zone in the center. And I think there's another slide for that, John. Maybe not. No, there isn't. So, yeah, so in terms of being in this neutral zone, has anything come up besides the work overload, low morale? Do you think we're moving through? Yes, Marjorie.
I was reading, but what I can say is that creativity is here. Janice and I were working to get our QuickBooks version was old. We needed a new QuickBooks. It was going to be $300 to $500. Somebody turned us on to a program where they donate to churches. So we got QuickBooks for $78. You know, those kinds of things, although there's a workload and things going on, there are things that are happening that are just so exciting that it is, the way I look at it, universe, spirit is saying, yes, you're on the right track.
Great. And that's, you know, not to mention the day that the room was flooding in the children's church, the electrical problem that that building has. You know, these things just pop up, and Janice and Marjorie just, handle it, which is just amazing. Yes.
So now that you brought up that word, the neutral zone, for me, the neutral zone was before Nicole left. I was already in that zone. I was getting ready to leave the center. I knew within the first 2 to 4 weeks that I had to get back here. So when you, I didn't realize it till you said the neutral zone because I was already in it. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if anybody else felt that way, but for me, we were waning really bad, and it's been great.
And so why did you make the decision to come back?
Because the energy, first of all, Nicole was missing a lot of days, and we weren't prepared for that. The people that were speaking, we weren't prepared for it. My needs were greater than that, and I didn't know how is this going to continue. And within 2 to 3 weeks, I realized that just like all changes, that it was exciting.
Thank you. And I think that brings up a really important point, is the minister is really critical to the growth and expansion of the center, but you all have a bigger role to play than you can imagine. That the life of the center is the community. That the reasons that you hear, we did that exercise, the 4 whys, about why do you come to the center. There are golden nuggets in that resonate among every one of you. And that's the motivation that keeps bringing you back, regardless of who the minister is, right? Your understanding of the possibilities of this teaching and what it could mean, not only in your life, but the life of the world, are really the energy that drives this forward. And so that if we can really get that energy focused in the right direction, there's no limitation where this community can go or grow. And deciding what business we are in is really a critical piece. If we shuffle it all off to the minister, then you're subject to whatever their focus is, right? So we got to get crystal clear on the expectations that we have of each other and the expectations that we have of this community and what kind of minister we want to attract and what their role will be. So there's a lot of work still to be done, which is good. Carol.
Excuse my back, Marjorie, but I want to include you in this. I came to Seal Beach Center for Spiritual Living in June after Josh left. The year that Josh left, I came in June. I had a relationship with Josh in a different situation prior to that, but at that time I made a decision to leave my other community, and I was researching, and I decided to come here. And the thing that attracted me at that time was the fact that this church still ran in spite of the fact that there was no minister. And not only did it just run, it ran well. The community, that's what attracted me here most of all, was that the community was committed to continuing on the church in spite of or without or whatever the language is. I had other thoughts about how that process went, but ultimately I was really attracted to how much people really cared here. Energetically, we talk about it, it's still here. And it's really blossoming, and from my experience, it's blossoming here.
Thank you. And for an interim to step into that situation is perfect. Because I've been in other interim situations where they couldn't run without a minister, and the level of dysfunction was huge. And so it's a relief to come into a community like this, and that probably should go on your profile, that we're a strong community that is self-sufficient So we can welcome a minister because we're already a healthy community. So that's something to recognize and reinforce and brag about on your profile. The profiles that you will be creating, the open pulpits now, they're video presentations, and they're pretty elaborate, of bragging on the community. And so that's what is before you, is putting together a video that says Seal Beach is just the best in the world.
Oh, well. Or just to tag on to Carol Ann's real fast. Yeah, that's besides the community of patrons, it's those practitioners. We have so many practitioners and they're so strong. That's what really also influenced me, encouraged me, et cetera, et cetera. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, you're got to know what your assets are and develop them. All right, stage 2, I think we're done with that. Stage 3, the new beginning. A time of acceptance and energy. People have begun to embrace the change. At this point, people may experience high energy, openness to learning, renewed commitment to the group or their role. So how do we feel about that? Yeah. Sylvia.
Yeah, I was also ready to leave. I didn't know where I was going to go, but I had a very low, I wanted to do something different. But once I realized that we were going to go through this process and there was going to be somebody here, I embraced the whole thing, knowing that there was going to be a new beginning, a new change, and which is ongoing, But I grabbed on to what this congregation is, and as a practitioner, that I wanted to give of myself to this community.
Perfect. Thank you. So, being familiar now with these 3 stages, where do you think we are as a community? Stage 3? Again, it doesn't, there's no judgment on it. It's your opinion, and feel free to express that. Marjorie, did you have something?
Yeah, I would say my guess is we're in all 3. It depends upon how I'm feeling that day. If I happen to be thinking about Josh, I might get a little angry again. If I look at what's happening here, I might get excited again. So it's an in and out, and I think that's kind of the way it's going to be for a while. It's just be aware of what I'm feeling, and it's all okay.
And the other part of that is, no matter what is going on, you may feel excited and solidly in stage 3, and then something triggers you, and you're back in stage 1. But it's important not to ignore that, to say, okay, if I still have anger toward Josh, what is that about me? What's going on in my life that I'm still triggered by that betrayal or whatever we want to name it? You understand, this is a movable thing and a dynamic thing that we always want to be paying attention to develop that awareness of, what is triggering me? Why am I going through this again? And, it's the spiral, is I'm back to the same place. But, I am pretty much over the anger. It's just a remembrance of love that I have. And it's a nice thing to recapture. Here, and then I'll come back.
Sorry about that. I just wanted to say that my concern is rebuilding the youth church right now, because I know that the pandemic has hit it really hard, and it continues to hit it hard. And I'm concerned, looking at the average age of the people in this room, myself included, that before they get lost to the metaverse and all these other things that are happening, I feel sad. I have a teenager. My husband is very involved in the youth church, and Wenda, of course. And, it was painful when Lisa left to me. And I'm just saying there's multiple things to think about, but I'm very concerned about the rebuilding of the youth church because it was such a strong. I mean, there were weeks when there were 30 kids here of all ages. And so I hope that part of all this change is rebuilding that youth church. And I know with the Omicron and all that, but sometimes I feel like in life in general, we're not evolving past the pandemic either. We're still kind of using it as an excuse. Well, you can't do this and you can't do that. You know, it's like too restrictive in a way. And I don't want to endanger anybody's health. I mean, I work for the Long Beach Health Department, so I know all of that stuff. But I just don't want to have that be like, oh, we're 2025. Oh, it's still the pandemic. That's why we don't do this or we don't, you know what I mean? I just want us to have a way to move on for that and just express that concern again that I hope that rebuilding the youth church is part of this.
Thank you. It's a very important issue, and I don't think anyone has a solution. And so when we have a condition that seems to be intractable, that won't move, how do we move the condition? We've got to get a different idea, right? And so that's where I would encourage more treatment work, more sitting down with a practitioner. We don't know what the answer is, but there is something inside of us that does, and we want to call that forward now to begin to support us and guide us and inspire us in the direction to reestablish the vibrancy of a youth program. So there's a mini treatment right there. But that's the work that needs to be done, because we're helpless to whatever the government mandates are requiring, or the confusion of the science right now about whatever it's about. And so in lieu of that, we have to take other action. Mm-hmm. So I would encourage you to get together with Wenda and do some powerful treatment about the youth program. And you may be doing that already.
So you mentioned, like, you read off like 5 names that are keeping this place going.
Yes.
And so I'm really, I mean, I've been in this for 40 years. And so, but I hadn't even been thinking about that. I didn't know who was keeping it going. And I know a couple people, but I think we have to bring that out more and maybe enlist some other people too, to start them out, you know, at kindergarten, to bring them up to helping more, because I don't know how they're doing it. I was just home watching it. I wasn't thinking about who was doing it.
It's a great point. And, you know, as we look at that and what kind of community do we want to have a minister-centric community or a mission-centric community, which means the community drives the mission rather than the minister. This is a very important choice to make. But as you pointed out, we can't have 5 people doing everything. Yeah. We need to be mentoring other people, and we need people to come forward if that's the kind of community that we want. Otherwise, we just leave it up to the minister. And I'll tell you right now, maybe I shouldn't say this, but Fort Lauderdale is a very prosperous church. They're offering the minister in excess of a 6-figure salary. The description of what that minister has to do has ministers running away from even applying to that church, because it's not realistic to expect a minister to do all these things, you know? And that is more the norm on many of these profiles that I see, is the expectations that the community has for a minister are just unrealistic. Given this day and age, virtual ain't going to go away, so we have to have the technology. The minister cannot run the technology, so you need a department of John back there, of one person, who's doing an extraordinary job, and this is new for him too, so he's learning as he's going along. And so, you know, it does take a village, right, to raise the children, but also to support one another. So there's more coming.
I've had a word drop out of my memory here, but there's 2 books written by the people in South County that have this huge Christian organization where it's this volunteer-centric kind of thing. And they've got somebody that just does thank you notes, and they do 1,000 of them a month. And they've got 1 million different positions filled
by volunteers, and that's how they run the place. I have the books at home. I'm going to read them someday when I feel less adverse to male supremacist religion.
Well, that can be an obstacle for anyone. And there's a lot of challenges with different models. And part of that is the paradigm that we're dealing with about what is spiritual community. Right now, in the past, it was the charismatic minister. Oh, we just wanted a charismatic minister. Oh, if we could only have a Michael Beckwith here, or if we could have, whoever your favorite minister is. The times were very different then than they are now. I don't know that a charismatic minister is going to solve anybody's problems, because usually they create more problems than they solve. Just because the numbers are there doesn't mean it's a healthy church. And, that was another thing when I went to that ministerial intensive. No, actually it was a couple of years later after I was already minister, and you hang out with other ministers that have been around. The first question they would ask, and maybe this is getting to the male-dominated theory, is how big is your church? How to stop a conversation cold, and a person who is a minister that is very prominent in Southern California, I will not name them, very well respected. I heard mention that somebody was talking about their church was over 100 people on Sunday, and they said, oh, so it was a real church. So there is still these paradigms and biases out there about what spiritual community means. What does it mean? Well, it can, if that's what you're focused on. It can mean numbers. But it isn't the only thing that describes. When I started, there was no such thing as a focus ministry. You know what a focus ministry is? It's where a minister decides the gift that they have to offer isn't in a community. It can be something that has to do with, one is chaplaincy, can be a focus ministry where all they do is serve in hospitals. Another focus ministry might be working with people and pets. Another might be organizational development. But these are now sanctioned by CSL. You can apply for a focus ministry. So the organization is opening up to different forms of spiritual community that aren't necessarily just meeting on Sunday. And there are still those that are very traditional that won't even do virtual. It's not wrong, it's just inevitable consequences that we can continue to grow and prosper just meeting face to face. So there are a lot of pieces and parts that need to go into the equation in terms of who do we want to be. So were there any more questions on what we've covered?
I don't have a question. I just have a suggestion for our children's ministry is that, and I'm willing to be a part of it, and that we do a visioning for that, which works, and that we vision for how we want our children's ministry to be.
And when do you think that should start?
Now.
So there you have it. Sylvia's willing to do visioning with the people involved in the children's church and start there and see what comes out of that. Because a visioning process isn't one and done. It's usually something that develops over a period of time. So we have the time now, and may be appropriate. I got to tell you, you all have the intellectual, mental, spiritual capacity to do anything. You have the talent right here. It's just finding a way to call it forward so that 5 people aren't doing everything. So it's possible, it's just, is the will there to do it, of recognizing and appreciating the talent that is here. Because anything is possible. So what I'd like to recommend is that you take this sheet home and apply it to any change that are having right now in your life, or some change that you've, like the first time you started Science of Mind. What are the changes that you went through? You know, and just look at this sheet and see where you are now in it. And it may bring up some things that you weren't expecting. I'm going to use it. My mother is in the middle of making her transition. I don't know what it looks like. So this is very valuable to me right now to look at that. She's been in hospice now for 3 weeks. She fell and broke 7 vertebrae in her back. And, you know, my siblings and I do a weekly Skype meeting to talk about it, and we've gone through a lot of these feelings and issues, and, you know, she has her good days and her bad days, but what does that mean? She's 97, she's not going to recover from a broken back, more likely than not, nor do we necessarily want her to. And so when she has a day when she's feeding herself and articulate, is that a good day? You know, well, I feel good that she's not suffering, but is she going to try and rally from this? So I don't know how to feel about it. So I'm definitely in between on this, trying to understand what I can do to help her to get to where she wants to go. So it's, you know, we're all in the middle of something. And so I challenge you to do the work, to really continue to ask questions. Ask the harder questions. Why am I triggered by that? Why am I triggered by or feeling guilty that I don't want her to recover? You know, what a place to be in. It's like, oh my God. But I'm okay with it because I'm asking the questions, doing my spiritual work, working with a practitioner. You know, what else can you do? This being human is a guest house. You know, a crowd of sorrows come in. Our job is simply to welcome it and deal with it because that's all we can do. So I appreciate you being here today. Hopefully gave you some food for thought, and I'll see you all next week. Thank you.